Howdy my totally as always tubular gamers, and we're back with, you guessed it, another ranking video, and today we're going to be talking about Arkane's immersive sims. Now, for the uninitiated, what does this mean? So, Arkane Studios, they're a studio that was established way back in 1999 and have been making games for quite some time. Their most famous games are Dishonored, Deathloop, and now Redfall. They have been making immersive sims for quite some time. What is an immersive sim? An immersive sim is described as a game really where the player is given the freedom to how they approach their objectives. Like the OG immersive sim, the one that really started them all, is like the original Deus Ex. There were some before there, but Deus Ex is really what popularized the whole immersive sim genre. And there's been plenty of examples since then, but in modern times, I'd say Arkane really is the best when it comes to immersive sims. They've made more than any other company, and they've made the most true to what Deus Ex originally was in terms of immersive sims, or System Shock 2, which also was a bit of an immersive sim. Games like Dishonored or Deathloop really lean heavily into what the immersive sim genre is, where there's just a ton of different ways you can go about your objective, whether you're stealthy, whether you kill everybody, whether you just go in a guns a-blazing. There's a bunch of different ways of tackling your objective, and that's really what it's all about, is how you want to interact with this world, and usually you'll get results. Their latest game, Redfall, Bethesda describes as an immersive sim, but we'll quickly see that that might not be so true. But anyway, I thought today we would talk about Arkane's immersive sims with the release of Redfall. I've always wanted to talk about Dishonored on the channel, so here we go. We're going to be talking about Dishonored, Dishonored 2, Dishonored Death of an Outsider, Prey 2016, Deathloop, and now Redfall. All of these are considered immersive sims, at least by Bethesda. And we're going to be ranking them worst to best, giving them all a little review. You know how this goes. Like, share, sub, comment, all that good stuff. We're going to just stack up all the games against each other. You know, how are the immersive sim elements? How's the story? How's the gameplay? How have they aged? Because some of these games are getting up there in age. Let me know down below your favorite. I want to give a shout out to some of Arkane's earlier games like Might and Magic, Dark Messiah, or Arx Fatalis. I was going to include them on here, but I think that would be better suited for like ranking all of Arkane's games as a whole rather than just their immersive sims. Those games have some immersive sim elements, but we're just going to be looking at Dishonored and on. Also, some of these games have some really awesome DLC, so I'll be sure to give it a shout out with each entry, but the DLC is going to be paired with the base game. Alright, and so let's get into it. What do I think is the weakest of these games? It's been pretty obvious if you've been following the news. So here we have Redfall releasing here in 2023. People have been stomping a mud hole in this game pretty much since the moment it was announced, and you know what? I'm going to do the same. You know, it's pretty rare these days where I'm like, wow, this game is just so bad that I don't even want to finish it, and that was Redfall. Like, I got really far in it, but I just could not finish this game, thanks to a variety of reasons. So the game takes place in the town of Redfall, and basically the town gets overrun by vampires, and it's up to you, one of these four characters, to stop the vampires and save the town. The story and premise seems interesting enough, and there's actually a good amount of lore and backstory with these vampires that I actually did like. Unfortunately, the actual storytelling is terrible. It's like through these awful cutscenes that are just stills, basically. And just the way the storytelling is done isn't very good. None of the characters are interesting. The antagonists aren't really interesting. These really cool-looking vampires, I wish they had more going on for them. And I just wish that there was really some real narrative threads here. I feel like there really isn't. Like, there's a general premise and you do some things here and there, but there isn't an overarching narrative. Nothing's really happening, and it's just really disappointing. Like, the story's just bad. Like, it's bad, the characters are bad, the way the story's told is bad. The narrative just sucks. But let's talk about the gameplay here. So the game is a 4-player first-person shooter, looter shooter with some immersive sim elements, according to Bethesda. I'm gonna just put this out there. This game, if it's an immersive sim, it's a terrible immersive sim. There's never like any options to do anything else. The world is nowhere near as interactable as any of Arkane's other games, and I personally wouldn't call this an immersive sim, but you know what, that's what Bethesda's calling it, so we'll leave it at that. But the general gameplay loop has you going to a safe house, accepting some kind of mission, going out with, again, up to 4 players, doing the mission. Usually it's very basic. You get swarmed by vampires or these really basic human enemies, and then you head back to the safe house, rinse and repeat. Along the way you'll find some loot and the occasional different kind of enemy, maybe even a boss, but that's really the general gameplay loop. And you know, it doesn't sound all that awful, it sounds pretty similar to a lot of other games, but I'm going to tell you why this just falls on its face. First off, the shooting in this game is awful. It feels awful, the controls are super sluggish, it's slow, it's stilted. It's kind of hard to describe until you try it. I thought something was wrong with either my controller or the game because it felt so off. No, it's really just the game. Like, the game just controls terribly. Okay, so the controls aren't very good. At least the guns do have a decent enough feel on them, but the actual missions are all really similar to each other. Like, there's just not really any variety here. It's go kill everyone there, or go destroy something, or go loot something. That's pretty much everything in the game when it comes to its mission variety. There's not a lot going on here, and I found myself getting pretty bored pretty quickly. They're just really bland. Speaking of bland, we have the open world. This is one of the most bland, basic, boring, empty open worlds I've ever seen. There is just nothing going on here. There's like nothing interesting. A lot of the time there's just no enemies. You just kind of run across it and that's it. There's just nothing interesting going on here. The set pieces aren't interesting. The locations aren't interesting. It looks like crap and it just isn't fun to explore. It just feels incredibly lifeless, even when the AI actually show up, like when a vampire shows up or the human enemies. And they're dumb as shit. They're super easy to take out unless there's like a dozen of them. Like, the AI is a joke in this game. It is so stupid. Like, what happened? But when you inevitably kill them because they don't put up any challenge at all, you'll get loot as well. This loot is, though, it's terrible. Like, it's a horrible loot system. It's unexciting. It just feels totally random, and there's just a bunch of random junk added onto these weapons, like stats that don't mean shit and rarity colors, but they honestly don't mean anything. You just pick the highest level thing and you're gonna be just fine. Like, it's so basic, it's so simple, and it feels like it was thrown in there just to be in there. Like, it doesn't really have any gameplay effect. It doesn't add to my experience at all. And I could say the same thing really about these abilities. Like, all the characters have abilities and these are so basic. Like, it feels like they had, you know, a nice set of abilities for, say, the next Dishonored character and then split up all of those abilities across 4 characters, and that's what we have, because it feels so basic. Like, these abilities are so bland. Like, they're really simple and you only have like 2 and that's it per character. It's like, really? That's it? Overwatch characters have more abilities than this. There's like 30 Overwatch characters. There's 4 characters here, and they all feel incredibly similar outside of the very minute abilities. And so all of this just comes together to create just such a bland, boring experience. Like, one of the most bland experiences I've had in quite some time with a game. Like, I was kind of shocked with how much I didn't like this game. It just sucked. And then when it comes to the graphics, I'd really rather just not talk about it. The game does not look very good. It has an interesting art style, kind of looks like Fortnite. Fortnite looks a lot better than this. Doesn't stack up to any other AAA game released in recent memory. The port sucks, doesn't really run all that well, shocker. I did get 60 FPS sometimes, which I know Xbox is getting at a later date, yet the presentation's just not good. And on a technical aspect, it's not good either. Super buggy, bugs all over the place, like a ton of bugs, crashes, glitches, you name it. But what about the characters themselves? Maybe their charm and wit saves that. No, they suck. I hate them. They're annoying. Speaking of what I hate is this game. I could go on about this game for another 10 minutes, but I'm going to just stop here and say, do not play this game. It is really upsetting how bad this game is, and it makes me kind of sad because this is one of the games I built my computer for, and it sucks. It just sucks by every measurable level. Do not play. Alright, so here we have Dishonored, Death of an Outsider, releasing in 2017. Now, originally this was going to be a DLC for Dishonored 2, but it became a standalone expansion, and with that, it's getting its own entry here. Now, it's important to keep in mind that originally the game was a DLC, and it was not meant to be, you know, Dishonored 3 or anything like that, because the game does reuse a lot from Dishonored 2. The game has you playing as Billy Lurk, former assassin and one of the better characters from Dishonored 2, and it's about her killing the Outsider. I mean, it's called Death of the Outsider. What did you expect the story to be about? She reunites with Dowd, another great character from earlier Dishonored games, and you know what? Billy's actually pretty solid as a protagonist. I actually like her, and I think the story is fine for what it is. When it comes to the gameplay, like I said, it is very similar to Dishonored 2. It uses pretty much all of Dishonored 2's systems, so when it comes to the stealth, the areas, and how you're just going to go about the game, if you played Dishonored 2, you'll feel very at home here. Now, one of the most important things to a Dishonored game is what tools do you have at your disposal. Billy is obviously not as well versed as, say, Corvo or Emily with the Void, and can only do a few things. She has Displace, which is basically where she can teleport. She has Semblance, where she can steal someone's identity to trick enemies, and Foresight, where you can fly around to really just see what's ahead. And you got to use the best of these, because this is all you get. You get it at the beginning of the game. You don't have to upgrade them or anything. You just fully have them unlocked, and it uses your energy like the other games. It does regenerate in this game though. And you just really got to make the best of your situation with these abilities. Billy, of course, can just go on a rampage and kill everybody with her other weapons, but, you know, there's always stealth. Stealth is always an option here. You can totally go through all these levels without being detected, just like the other Dishonored games, and as an immersive sim, it's great in that sense. However, the reason this game isn't as high as, say, the other games on this list is because really of its length and levels. The game is maybe like 3 or 4 hours long, and you know, it was supposed to be a DLC, so keep that in mind, but there's only a few areas in this entire game, and you actually just go through them multiple times, which I was like, huh. And yeah, things are a little different like the second time you go through an area, but it still is the same area. You just go through repeated areas and it's slightly different, and so that's always something to keep in mind. But the actual core gameplay, yeah, I think it's actually still pretty good. If you like Dishonored 2, if you like how its stealth is, how freaking ridiculous its stealth will get with the enemies, will actually just see you through shit and they're really smart, then yeah, I think the gameplay loop is solid enough. Would I say that the objectives or missions are all that memorable? No, I wouldn't say they're the most memorable. In fact, I just finally played through this game just like a month or two ago, and I can barely remember any of the missions. I remember you go to the bank, and that's the best mission in the game. But if you are looking for more Dishonored, especially Dishonored 2, then you should have already played this game. If not, then you should go play it. It's on Game Pass. I recommend checking it out. Presentation's pretty solid, Billy's a good character, and the gameplay is fine enough for what it is. But you're not going to get a lot of longevity or all that much replayability out of this one. And so here we have Prey releasing in 2017. This game is completely unrelated to the original 2006 Prey on 360, which I'm going to just give a huge shout out to. I love that game. That's one of my favorite 360 games. That game was great. But yeah, this game is totally unrelated, and it was developed primarily by Arkane Austin. The game was developed more as a spiritual successor to System Shock 2 than anything else. The game takes place in an alternate timeline in which an accelerated space race resulted in humankind taken to orbital stations way earlier than they probably will in real life. You play as Morgan Yu, exploring the space station Talos 1, which is orbiting around the Earth moon L2. And really you're researching this hostile alien force known as the Typhon, which can take many forms and has a bunch of different powers, including shapeshifting into literally in any inanimate object. And the Typhon escape confinement, and you know, they take over the ship and you gotta just kind of get out of there. You know how these things go. The story was solid enough in Prey. The Typhon were definitely interesting. I thought they were a very interesting antagonist, and their powers were very different. I would say the game does have a lot of backstory as well. There is a ton of audio logs, things to read. Like, the game actually has a surprising amount of backstory. I think the lore and just general story of this game is pretty solid. I wouldn't say it was, you know, like amazing, but it was fine enough. So yeah, the gameplay sees the player really getting around this space station, just eventually trying to get the hell off it. You know, there's a bunch of other objectives that show up throughout it, but that's the general gist of it. You're just trying to get through this space station, and a bunch of the Typhon are going to attack you. The game is a first-person shooter, however, there is a bunch of role-playing elements and stealth elements, and really just immersive sim elements. There's a bunch of different ways you can go about your objectives. It is set in an open world, but this is a very different open world than what you're thinking. It is not open or expansive in any sense. It's that it's all interconnected, and you can pretty much go to almost all of it at any point. And you'll be frequently backtracking to earlier areas, especially when you get new abilities, kind of like a Metroidvania, I guess, in that sense. But there's a bunch of different role-playing elements as well, as you can really customize your build and how you want your attributes to be. And there's a bunch of different ways you can go up against the Typhon. You can just go up straight up against them with your weapons, but I mean, that's not going to be the most effective way. You can also stealth around, and you can use some of the tools at your disposal. The environment's actually a really big one. Like, you get this glue gun that can actually do a lot of things. Like, it can make platforms, it can freeze enemies, it can like stop fire from being shot out of, say, a leaky pipe. Like, this glue gun's actually really great. It's the best weapon in the game. But the Typhon are really interesting since they can literally be any inanimate object, and there's some ways to tell if it's a Typhon or not, but a lot of the time you're just gonna get borderline jump scared when this shit jumps out at you. along with just exploring the spaceship. You also solve puzzles, like sometimes you do actually even go into space and you can fly around. The space controls are actually pretty decent, but I think the puzzles are decent, and there's actually a lot of ways to go about your objectives. Sometimes the navigation can be confusing, I won't lie, especially when it tells you that there's like 5 different ways to go about your objective and there's just a bunch of different waypoints, but I think it's actually pretty cool how many different ways there are to go and do the objectives here. Now this Prey, I know a lot of people really like it, and I like it too, but I never loved this game like some people did. I always thought that the combat was just kind of wonky in this game. I never thought it was amazing, and I really just stealthed my way past a lot of it. Again, the navigation, I thought it was a little confusing at times, and I think that not all of the puzzles were amazing. I have heard that this game is just so good the second time you play through it, and my response is, I shouldn't have to play through a game a second time for it to be great. It should be great the first time and like amazing the second time. Like, that's just me, it's my opinion, maybe it's my hot take. Anyway, the DLC Moon Crash was actually totally different from the main game. Also, it was like a separate game mode. It was like a roguelike, and yeah, it was actually pretty cool also. There was also the VR experience with the Typhon Hunter, but never really tried that either. Prey 2017, you know, it's a good game. It's pretty interesting, and it is really different from that original Prey, and if you haven't played it by now, I think it is worth giving a shot if you're looking for something especially different, but I can't say that everybody's going to enjoy this game. I think most people are going to, and the game's kind of becoming a bit of a cult hit if it hasn't already, just because it never achieved, you know, the greatest level of success, but the people who like it really like it. And so here we have Dishonored 2 releasing in 2016. Like the title implies, it's a sequel to Dishonored. It takes place many years later. This time you can actually play as Emily, or you can continue to play as Corvo again. I decided to try Emily. She is now Empress and is at this funeral when this witch known as Delia Copperspoon shows up and basically is able to completely take over, and so it's up to Emily to get her people back, or Corvo to save Emily again, depending again who you choose. The story in this game, I'll be real, I just never really cared for this story. I never thought it was all that interesting. I never thought the narrative was all that great, and I didn't care much for the characters actually, or the antagonist, and the endings, I just couldn't really care by the end of it, and maybe that's just me, maybe it's one of my hot takes, but I didn't think the story was all that good. I didn't think the world was anywhere near as interesting as the first game either. I will say though, graphically, this game looks amazing. It looks like an oil painting. There's not many games that look like this. The presentation is great. The story and characters and just the world though, it was just kind of there for me. But where Dishonored 2 absolutely shines is in its gameplay. It expands on the original Dishonored in a variety of different ways. Like I've said 3 times at this point, you can play as Corvo or Emily. They both have different abilities. Corvo has what he had mostly in the first Dishonored. Emily has pretty new abilities, and a lot of these are really interesting, and you can make them get so powerful. You can be raw as fuck in this game. Like, you can absolutely destroy enemies with Emily's abilities. I remember the first time I played this game, I just went nuts with Domino, and now they also even have a skill tree, which is different from the first game. I think all of the abilities across both characters are just really well done. And the game is, like I've said, an immersive sim, so there's a ton of different ways of going about your missions. And the missions in this game, while I think they aren't as interesting as the first Dishonored's and not as memorable, there's still a bunch of different ways to go about them. Like, there are so many different ways to do some of these levels and go about it. You can just walk in and just annihilate everybody. That's always an option, but you can be really stealthy in this game. You can make it so nobody ever sees you. You can make it so you never kill anybody. Like, they really expanded the non-lethal options, and the stealth as a whole has actually been expanded on quite a bit. The enemies are way smarter and way better at seeing you. This is actually one of the hardest games when it comes to stealth mechanics. Like, the enemies are not messing around. They are stupid good in this game, to the point that it actually gets kind of annoying how good they are at seeing you. They can even see you when you're leaning now. And I've heard some people over the years say that the stealth in Dishonored 2 is just overly punishing, and I don't know about that one, but it definitely is really challenging. It is not messing around when it comes to stealth. If you thought the first game's stealth was too easy, you go play this one. The missions themselves, I think they're pretty good for the most part, but like I said earlier, I just don't think they're as memorable or as great as the ones from the first game. There are some really good ones here, like the Mansion in Ruins or the Box, and I'll just leave it at that, but I think they were still pretty good overall. And like I've said a few times now, the amount of different ways you can go about these levels really makes them incredibly replayable. The game also brings back the whole chaos system from the first game, but I don't think it's as well done here. Instead, like blood flies go all over the corpses and more enemies spawn as you become more violent, and that's about it. Overall, I would say Dishonored 2 is still a pretty good game. I know there's a lot of people who think that it is quite a bit better than the first game, and you know, I think this game is way better than the first game in certain aspects, like the general gameplay, the amount of options you have in each level, the non-lethal options in particular are way better, but I just care for the first game's story, premise, world, and missions more than this game. Still though, I have no problem recommending Dishonored 2. It is a very good game, and it's been fixed on PC. It's no longer shit like when it launched all those years ago. Totally check it out. And so here we have Deathloop releasing in 2021. I was pretty excited for this one, got a day one on the PS5, and you know what? I was not disappointed with this one. I actually thoroughly enjoyed Deathloop. So what is Deathloop? The story is pretty straightforward. You wake up on a beach, don't remember anything, you listen to some tapes though, and it turns out that you're a man named Colt and you're stuck in a time loop. See, you're stuck in a loop that's similar to Groundhog Day where you're reliving the same day over and over and over, and you got someone hunting you named Juliana, and the only way for you to get out of this nightmare is to break the loop. You gotta kill these 8 visionaries and get the hell out of there. I actually really like the story, characters, and setting of this game. I think Colt's great, Juliana's great also. I think the visionaries are all interesting, and the setting is actually really unique. I haven't seen many games with this kind of setting, and yeah, it's actually really unique. The story's good, the way it progresses is good, ending is a bit weird, but yeah, I actually really like the story and the characters. I'd say Colt's probably the best character Arkane's ever made for any of their games, actually, and Juliana's probably the second best. Seriously, they're actually pretty good, and I thought the premise, story, and the way everything progressed was pretty good. Now when it comes to the gameplay, it is a first-person shooter immersive sim. I'm going to just say right now this is absolutely an immersive sim. There are a bunch of different ways you can go after these visionaries. The goal really is to kill these visionaries. You know, at first you got to figure out who they all are, you got to figure out where they are. There's 4 periods to each day: morning, noon, afternoon, and evening. Some of them are only available during certain times, and you gotta line it up in a way where you can kill all of them in one day, and there is a bit of a puzzle aspect to it, but a lot of detective work goes into just figuring out everything you can about these visionaries so that then you can kill them. And there's a bunch of different ways to go about figuring out everything about them. And Colt has a bunch of different tools at his disposal to figure out everything he can about these visionaries and eventually taking them out. He has a ton of different weapons. There's a decent variety of weapons here, and I'll just say the gunplay, it's not amazing, but it's serviceable enough. It's fine for what it is, but he also does have a couple abilities similar to, say, Corvo in Dishonored. You know, there's the usual blink. You can even be stealthy in this game. Obviously, you can't be non-lethal. That's just not how the game works. And the stealth, I'll be real, it just isn't very fleshed out and it's not very good. The AI are pretty stupid, but it is an option. You even get some gadgets as well. And really, you're going to be making use of all of Colt's abilities and tools to take out everyone. So when it comes to the levels or missions, it's really just a couple areas that you'll constantly be exploring, and you know, they're not the biggest, but they are dense, and they do change depending on when in the day it is, so it never feels like you're going through the same area too many times. Of course, by the end, you know, it gets a little repetitive, but that is kind of the point. But what really makes this game more interesting when it comes to its loop, no pun intended, is the multiplayer aspect of things. So Colt is constantly being hunted down by Juliana, an agent tasked to protect the time loop and just take out Colt every single day. And so she will show up pretty frequently to take Colt out with all the tools at her disposal. And if you have online multiplayer on and there are people playing the game, it'll actually be another human that shows up to try to take you out. And this is where the game actually gets really challenging and it gets really fun. If you don't have online on, then yeah, just an AI shows up and it's super easy to take her out actually. But I would say the most challenge and thrill I had with this game was when a human player controlled Juliana would show up in the middle of me trying to take out all the visionaries and me going, ah shit, and having to get into a firefight, or I just get totally obliterated and stealth killed, which did happen plenty of times as well. But all in all, I would say Deathloop is a pretty great game. It's one of Arkane's best in my opinion. I really enjoyed my time with it. One negative I am going to throw out there is that once you really figure out how to take out all the visionaries in one day, there's really only like one way to take them all out in a day. I mean, maybe there's another way, but it seemed like there was only one way for me, and I think for an immersive sim that's a little lame. I could be totally wrong. There could be a bunch of different ways where you're able to take out all the visionaries in a day, but it seemed like there was just one way. but I still have no problem recommending Deathloop if you like immersive sims, if you like Dishonored, if you like shooters. It's worth trying. But here we have Dishonored releasing in 2012, and this is what I believe to be Arkane's best immersive sim and really their best game overall. Now, Dishonored, it takes place in this plague-ridden city known as Dunwall, and it follows the story of Corvo, who's this bodyguard to the Empress of the Isles. He is actually framed for her murder, though, and is forced to become an assassin, seeking revenge on those who conspired against him because he's been, dishonored. Ooh. No, the story is actually pretty interesting. Look, I'm not going to say the story is amazing in Dishonored. I don't think most people would say the story is amazing, but the world is actually really interesting, and the way the game progresses is pretty interesting. Corvo is a mute, but nobody else is, and there's some pretty good voice acting actually here. I think the world is the most interesting part of Dishonored, and I think it's actually pretty well done. So when it comes to the gameplay, it is absolutely an immersive sim, because you are dropped into these really realized areas of this just really shit city. And there is a real emphasis on player choice. You can complete these missions that you're given in a variety of different ways. You can be totally stealthy, you can go in guns a-blazing, a combination of both. You can find a bunch of new paths or alternatives for completing mission goals, making it possible to actually complete every level without killing a single person. It is possible, and there's some replayability thanks to that. And what I always thought was really cool was the game would actually adjust depending on how violent you were. Not only would the story actually change in the ending, but just the world itself would change, how areas would change. There'd be a shit ton of these rats showing up, which are causing the plague. And if you're just killing everybody, the rats are going to show up and the plague's going to spread. And it's going to be harder to actually go through these missions thanks to these actually lethal rats. Now, I just said how you have a bunch of player choice, but what tools do you have at your disposal? Corvo has a bunch of different weapons at his disposal, some lethal, some non-lethal, but the biggest draw of Dishonored has got to be the powers. The powers are really what make Dishonored. And I gotta say that it's a great roster right off the bat, so great that pretty much all of Arkane's games have used it since, where you have Blink where you can teleport to places, there's like Dark Vision, there's Possession where you can take control of other characters. There's my favorite, which is Bend Time, which you can slow or freeze time. There's Wind Blast, which is a gust of wind. There's Shadow Kill. There's a bunch of different powers in this game, and you can't actually have all of them in one playthrough. You will have to pick and choose, again adding to the replayability. And it's thanks to these powers that you have a lot of options at your disposal. There's a decent amount of weapons and gadgets you have as well, and these missions are all really varied for the most part. I think these are some of the best missions and environments of all of the Dishonored games, and I think that the amount of different ways to go about them is really interesting and unique still to this day. Sure, Dishonored 2 has more options and definitely more non-lethal options than just knocking people out, but I still really like the first Dishonored. It's the party level, that mission is my favorite in the game. And when it comes to the stealth, it's nowhere near as aggressive and just ridiculous as Dishonored 2's. It's a lot more manageable and what you would expect from a video game. Now, I played through Dishonored twice actually. I was very stealthy and slow and didn't kill anybody, and then I just ran in and killed absolutely everybody, and by the end of it, these missions felt totally different, just thanks to how many rats were all over the place, how many more extra guards, and just the way the story was going. And so I think it's actually really awesome. You really do get 2 playthroughs with this game if you want to see everything. Even more so than Dishonored 2. Look, Dishonored 2 has a lot of great things. I'd say the gameplay low-key is better, but Dishonored 1's world and missions and level design I think is just really great. I think it's just superb, and it's really one of my favorite stealth games of all time thanks to that. And I'm going to give a special shout out to the DLC. The DLC in Dishonored 1 is some of the best DLC you will find in any video game. It is not worth skipping. If you play Dishonored, you like Dishonored, absolutely play the DLC. The DLC is just as good as the main game, if not even better. I really actually enjoyed the DLC. With Dowd, that was great. No, Dishonored is just great, thanks to, again, its amazing level design, its interesting world, its great missions, its player choice, and really just providing a unique, awesome, replayable experience, and the game is just kind of unforgettable for that, and I'm certainly not going to forget it anytime soon. I love this game. And so with all that, absolutely, go try Dishonored. If for some reason you haven't, please just go try Dishonored. Anyway, that's it for this video. Hope everyone has a good one. Have a good rest of the day, week, whatever it is. Bye-bye now. Bricks, if you made it to this part of the video, comment bricks. I want to see bricks down there, and you'll get a heart. Thank you. Bye-bye.